Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about a film which captures the unpredictable journey of one of Tom Hanks' more innocent and enduring characters, Forrest Gump. This is Season 2, Episode 2.
Forrest Gump is born with a low IQ and is simple-minded but a kind-hearted man. Despite his limitations, Forrest Gump is at the forefront of some of America's most pivotal moments. We watch Forrest as he meets Elvis, joins the war effort in Vietnam, meets John Lennon, and many, many more famous highlights from America's history. So Jay, my first question to you is, have you seen the film before? And if you have, what did you remember from it?
This is a film, Andy, I've seen so many times. I can't even count how many times I've seen it. So as a teenager, I did fact check this, Andy, because I know you picked me up on this last week where you said I wasn't a child when I was like in my early 20s when I mentioned it. So I actually looked at the date, worked out my age. So I was a teenager. I was 14 or 15. So I had this film on VHS, and I think I had it on DVD as well at some point as well. And I just remembered pretty much everything, to be fair. When I rewatched it, there wasn't anything that I thought, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So I think it's the film actually, out of all, season 1 and what we've done so far in season 2, that I've probably remembered the most so far. What about you, Andy? Have you seen this before, and what did you remember?
So the first time I saw this would have been in the cinema. I would have been, I think, maybe 10 years old, even though I believe the certificate is a 12, so sorry about that. And then, I've seen it a bunch of times since. It's one of those films where if it's on the TV, I stop and watch it. Even if it's partway through or, it's just on terrestrial TV with adverts. If it's on, I watch it. It gets me every single time. And like you, I remembered pretty much everything to do with the film as well. So nothing came as much of a surprise to me.
So we talk about the cast now. So obviously we're doing Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks plays Forrest Gump, and we've got Robin Wright as Hanks's love interest, Jenny Curran.
A couple of other supporting characters. We've got Gary Sinise playing Lieutenant Dan Taylor, and Sally Field playing Forrest Gump's mother, Mrs. Gump. The budget was $55 million. The worldwide box office, $679.8 million, which means the adjusted box office was just under $1.4 billion. Interestingly, although it opened at number 1 in the US weekend box office, replacing Disney's The Lion King, it dropped to number 2 the following weekend. It was dislodged by Arnold Schwarzenegger's film True Lies.
Yeah, however, that wasn't the end of Forrest Gump's reign at number 1. So Forrest Gump did regain the top spot 5 more times over the first 10 weekends. And this was a very good year for cinema, because we had, a very good month, I'd say, as well, because you've got Tom Hanks competing against Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies, as Andy just mentioned. You had Jim Carrey in The Mask. You had Harrison Ford as Jack Ryan in Clear and Present Danger. And also you've got Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. So some good competition there against Hanks.
It's considered what's known as a successful failure due to distributors and exhibitors' high fees. And this is the first time I've heard of this phrase, but it's also reported that the film used Hollywood accounting to inflate the expenses and therefore minimising profit sharing, taxes and royalties, as they were obviously based on net profits.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have heard of that before, Andy, because I've seen it in the news before where certain people involved have missed out on what they believe they're due because of this accounting methodology. So Forrest Gump held the record for the highest grossing Paramount film until it was surpassed by James Cameron's Titanic in 1997.
That was quite the powerhouse film, wasn't it, Titanic? Won many, many awards, but Forrest Gump won quite a few awards of its own. In fact, 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, Best Director, Best Visual Effects, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Film Editing.
And this was Hank's second Best Actor Academy Award, having won the previous year for Philadelphia. And Hanks was against some good competition here. He beat Morgan Freeman from The Shawshank Redemption and John Travolta in his comeback film Pulp Fiction.
That's an all-star lineup if ever there was one. A couple of other notable points. Forrest Gump beat Four Weddings and a Funeral, Pulp Fiction, and The Shawshank Redemption in the Best Picture category. And Robert Zemeckis beat Woody Allen and Quentin Tarantino in the Best Director category.
Yeah, some very good competition indeed, Andy.
Right, let's get into a little bit more detail about the film. So, released in 1994, and as mentioned a second ago, Robert Zemeckis was the director, and the soundtrack composer was Alan Silvestri.
So we're going to talk about some general points now before we get into a bit deeper into the film. So Robin Wright, obviously, as I mentioned, played Jenny, has had a successful career featuring in a range of films and TV shows. And at one point, Wright was one of the highest paid actresses for a role in House of Cards, which is a program on Netflix, which I've never seen, Andy. Wright has featured in films such as Message in a Bottle, Unbreakable, Loved, Moneyball, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is obviously opposite Daniel Craig, and also more recently in the Wonder Woman films, which I have seen.
Quite a lot of those I've not seen, but we can't get away from James Bond, can we? Not even in season 2. There's always that link there. More on that to follow. Let's talk about Gary Sinise second. He appeared alongside Hanks in 3 films. So Forrest Gump, as mentioned, Apollo 13 and The Green Mile were the other 2. Now Sinise is also featured in other films, but is probably best known for his work on the small screen. He was in 197 episodes of CSI New York, and was in the lead role of Criminal Minds Beyond Borders and 13 Reasons Why.
Sinise also co-formed the Lieutenant Dan band with Kimo Williams and is named after his character from Forrest Gump, obviously. The band performs for charities in the US Armed Forces, and Sinise also supports a range of veteran organisations and has done extensive humanitarian work. And I've seen this a lot on social media, Andy. He's done a lot of work for the troops that you see. And he's raised a lot of money as well from this playing Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah, I had no idea about that actually until I saw the research. Clearly the Lieutenant Dan brand is strong here with the Lieutenant Dan band, easy for me to say. But yeah, it's good to see that he's using that name for good. Now let's talk about Robert Zemeckis a little bit. So he and Tom Hanks have actually worked together 4 times. On Forrest Gump, of course, which we're talking about today, but also on Pinocchio, The Polar Express, and Castaway. Now, Zemeckis has also directed the Back to the Future trilogy, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Romance in the Stone, amongst other things, and is going to be teaming up again with Hanks and Robin Wright for the 2024 film Here. That I've not heard of, but I'm anxious to know more just because of the names involved there. That could be quite interesting.
Indeed, yeah. We only have to wait until next year, Andy. And Andy, Back to the Future films I love. Who Framed Roger Rabbit I did not like. Romance in the Stone, I like that film. And I got the wife watching that a few months ago because she's not seen it. So he's done some really good films, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's a good list there. I don't mind Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It's a nice enough kids film. Probably wouldn't go out of my way to watch it these days. But Back to the Future, that's got a list on amongst the all-time classic trilogies for sure. Let's talk about another one of Hanks' co-stars in this. Mykelti Williamson, who played Bubba, actually had to wear a lip attachment to create the protruding lip that you see Bubba have in the film.
Yeah, which I didn't realise was an attachment, Andy. I thought it was his real lip.
I would have had no idea if I'd not read that just now.
I did read an interview as part of the research where he said where he was going to auditions after he did Forrest Gump, and casting people were disappointed that the lip that he had in Forrest Gump wasn't his real lip. They were looking for like quirky kind of characters, and they're thinking he would be ideal, but then when he turned up and his lip was just fine, he was missing out on quite a lot of parts apparently.
So they were after that distinctive look. It'd be like if Richard Keel turned up and you found out he's actually 5'6", not 7'1".
Yeah, indeed. Another link back to season 1 of The Rating Room. And talking about interviews, and in an interview, Hanks revealed he copied the young Forrest Gump actor's unique, thick Southern accent. And this is something my wife actually showed me the other week, Andy. She showed me this interview on Graham Norton. She said, this would be interesting when you watch Forrest Gump. And because what they were saying was they got Hanks and the actor who played him, the young Forrest Gump, Michael Connor Humphreys, in a room, and originally they were going to get the young actor to copy Tom Hanks, but Tom Hanks said, no, actually, I'm going to copy the young Forrest Gump actor because his voice was quite unique. So they did it the other way around. And Humphreys would only act in one more film, actually, and also featured in a TV film, but he was uncredited as well. So he, instead of pursuing a career in acting, he ended up enlisting in the army and spent 4 years in Germany, Iraq, and back in the US.
Oh, so a potential promising acting career was not to be. That's interesting. We'll talk about it, another child star in a few minutes. But the Forrest Gump movie was actually based on a 1986 novel by Winston Groom. The book also has a sequel called Gump & Co. Now, Gump & Co has been in development hell for years. And as of this recording, which is, we're May 2023, we're recording this for those interested, still not been made into a film. Groom was also contracted to receive 3% of the film's net profit, but never saw this money due to the aforementioned Hollywood accounting.
Yes, very disgruntled, wouldn't you, if you were due 3% of the profits that we mentioned earlier on and never saw a penny of that.
Yeah, well, there's some big numbers we banded around, and 0 wasn't one of them.
No, but there were lots of zeros in those numbers.
Indeed.
But moving on, John Travolta was the original choice to play Forrest Gump, but he declined, later stating this was a mistake. And I'm struggling to see what that would look like with John Travolta. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier on, Travolta lost out in the Oscar to Tom Hanks. He obviously did Pulp Fiction.
He did. Have I mentioned this on the pod before, or mentioned this to you off air, or maybe never at all? But it's one of my favourite films of all time. If maybe my favourite film of all time is Pulp Fiction, and the fact that it could have been someone other than John Travolta is quite strange. But also think about the role he turned down and the role he went to. That's two huge roles to choose from. I don't know how would you make the choice.
I don't know. Flip a coin. I think because everyone says Pulp Fiction was John Travolta's comeback movie. Obviously he was big when he was younger, Saturday Night Fever, Grease, etc. But Tarantino obviously brought him back, so I'm guessing he did films, but Pulp Fiction was the film that he made it back, and obviously he got a load more acting roles after Pulp Fiction. But yeah, I don't think he'd be too well. Obviously he was disappointed in being missing out on Forrest Gump, and I suppose depending on when they filmed it, it wasn't necessarily he had to do Pulp Fiction or Forrest Gump. He could have done both of them. But yeah, he did state that it was a mistake not doing Forrest Gump. So we could have missed out on Hanks, Andy, in season 2. This might have not even been on, this wouldn't have been on the list, because obviously this is all about Tom Hanks.
We might have been doing Pulp Fiction starring Tom Hanks. And that is a very different movie.
That is a very different movie indeed.
But I mentioned we talk about another child actor in this, and we have the debut film appearance of Haley Joel Osment. Now, Haley Joel Osment would go on to have numerous film and TV appearances, but probably best known for the film The Sixth Sense opposite Bruce Willis. But this is where he got his big break.
Yes. Just before I move on, Sixth Sense is one of those films, unfortunately, I found out about the twist before I watched it, so it kind of ruined it for me.
I know we don't want to go long, but can I tell you my Blair Witch analogy that links into that? So
go for it.
I went to see the second Blair Witch film. There was more than one. Book of Shadows, I believe it was called. And arrived at the cinema, showed the usher, I guess it would be, my ticket, and they said, in you go. And they were still playing the previous showing of Blair Witch Book of Shadows. And I saw the very last scene and heard the immortal words, and I'll have to beep this, they f***ed with the tape. And then it went to credits. And that was the big twist at the end of the film. So that was ruined for me minutes before I went in to see the film at the cinema.
That must have been so disappointing, Andy. I've never seen any of the Blair Witch films, 'cause I don't like horror films, so I've never seen them.
First one's a bit of a cult classic. It's all right. The second one, despite the twists being ruined for me, even without that, terrible film. And I believe there were some others that went straight to DVD as well, but I've not endeavoured to watch those, and I don't think I ever will.
That is. Oh, did you have a word with the cinema worker?
I can't remember. I think we were probably just so disappointed at the overall film, not just the ruined ending, that it wasn't worth it.
So, moving on, we're going to talk about the film now for a bit. The film opens and closes with a memorable score and a simple white feather floating through the air.
Yeah, this was a really beautiful scene. It's all about the music, really, wasn't it? And the score. And I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that American Beauty stole this idea for when they did the plastic bag scene, because I think that was out 4 or 5 years later. And it's basically the same, isn't it? But with a bag instead of a feather.
I've never seen that film, Andy.
Okay.
So when I saw your notes, I thought, and I thought, I'm not going to Google it or YouTube it and see. But if it is a floating plastic bag, is it at the beginning, at the end, or is it just?
Do you know, I can't remember exactly where it features in the film, but it's quite a famous scene from the film, and I think it's been replicated or parodied numerous times. But it's it just reminded me of that. But American Beauty, I believe, was out in '99, so a good 5 years after Forrest Gump. So I'm assuming this is where they got it from. I could be wrong, but it was just the first thought that came to mind when I saw that feather floating around the screen. Now this takes us to the opening dialogue where Forrest Gump is at the bus stop, and he's chatting to strangers, and that's kind of the premise of the film, isn't it? He's at the bus stop chatting to various people about his life so far. The note I made here: if you talk to strangers at a bus stop these days, you're going to catch a beating, aren't you?
Andy, did I ever tell you how I met my wife?
You didn't pretend to be Forrest Gump at the bus stop, did you?
That's funny because, yes, I did meet her at a bus stop. I never met her before, and I literally got my tongue pierced the day before, so I couldn't really talk very well. So my tongue was really swollen. It was bleeding. I was like trying to talk to her, like mumbling and everything. And then I found out later that she went home and like spoke to her mum and said like some weirdo was talking to her at the bus stop. And then it was like during the summer. And then when I started college again in September, she caught the same bus as me in the morning, and then she was on the same floor of college floor, because the building, I think there were 6 floors in college where I went to. We were both on the 3rd floor.
So she thought you was not only a weirdo at the bus stop, but now you're a weirdo following her everywhere as well.
Stalking her, yeah.
So it's less a marriage and more Stockholm syndrome. Is that what you're saying?
But yeah, it is funny there how Forrest is just chatting. Like, yeah, you don't really chat to people at the bus stop now. Everyone would be on the mobile phone, wouldn't they? I think she's reading a magazine or something, isn't she, as well? So we find out that Forrest Gump was named after an old relative who happens to be the KKK founder, from memory, as well. Yeah,
and this was a bit awkward to me because the woman at the bus stop is a black lady, and he's telling this story to about his name, and I don't know, I kind of cringed a little bit.
Yeah, because he's just oblivious to it, isn't he? But yeah, it was a bit awkward. So you find out Forrest has an IQ of 75, which is below the standard entry to a state school, and the principal's showing like this little, I think it's like a chart, isn't it, with a little line, and it is showing where, because I think it's IQ 80, and I think he's just obviously just below it with 75. But that doesn't stop Mrs. Gump. She's determined, who sleeps with the principal, to get Forrest admission to the state school.
Indeed, this was a memorable scene. Now, I'm going to probably do this several times in the episode, and we might edit them out so you'll never hear it, but I love this quote. I just thought this whole scene. And so the principal comes out of the house, and Forrest is sat on the porch, and he'd been listening to what had been going on upstairs. And the principal says, "Your mama sure does care about your schooling, son. You don't say a lot, do you?" And to which Forrest just goes, "Which, was the replication of what he'd heard upstairs. And I just found that a hilarious scene. And I apologise. If we keep this in the episode, I apologise to anyone offended by the sexual noises that came from me.
I was going to watch this film with my boy, Andy, but there was this bit and the bit later on where Forrest touched a breast for the first time, and I thought, do I want to sit with my 14-year-old son while these bits on? And I thought, no, I'm not going to tell him when I'm watching it, so I just watched it on my Todd. So yeah, I couldn't sit through that. But I remember watching this with my parents there, so that would have been awkward. So we see the first of many famous people throughout the film. So we see Forrest with a young Elvis Presley, and they're together in one of the rooms. And it's alluded that Elvis copied Forrest's dancing technique, because this later see him on TV.
Yeah, he's got the awkward leg movement, hasn't he, because of the braces. But then it's time for Forrest to go to school. Gets the school bus and meets Jenny for the first time. And you would argue, quite rightly, that this is the moment that changes Forrest's life forever. Now, Jenny, as we find out, has got a pretty horrible backstory, and that will play into the film throughout. Forrest is completely oblivious to it. I believe there's, and I can't remember the exact quote, but he says something about her dad and how much he loved his daughter, how much he loved Jenna because he's always kissing her and touching her. And it's one of those things, he doesn't understand what he's saying, but it's so sad. It's tragic, isn't it?
It is tragic because, yeah, it's obviously, you're telling the audience about it, aren't you? So Forrest doesn't understand. But that just reminded me, I'm sure Forrest says his daughters, isn't it? Not just Jenny. Is that right? Did I remember that right?
Yeah, he might have said like his daughters, or he might say Jenny and her sisters.
Yeah,
something.
But
like
you never
that,
hear about Jenny's sisters again, do you? So you know when she gets taken away to live with her grandma, I think she's on her own, isn't she? So you never hear any mention of her siblings, do you?
It's a passing reference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's lighten the mood a little bit. So when Forrest introduces himself on the bus, says, and I'll do the accent, why not? My name's Forrest Gump. The question here, which is better? Forrest Gump, or Bond, James Bond?
It's obviously Andy Bond, James Bond, but I wonder if Bond would ever do the Bond, James Bond in a Southern American accent when he's undercover. That would be interesting to hear. Talking about kind of like iconic lines, we've got Jenny shouts the "Run, Forrest, run," which is, I would say, one or two iconic lines from the film. The other being, "My mama always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Now, I'm not going to try to do accents there, Andy. That is just my natural voice there. And Forrest is being chased by 3 kids on bicycles when Jenny shouts that. And then later we see a very similar scene, but this time Forrest is older. He's in high school, from memory, and he's being chased by the high school kids in this kind of pickup truck. And then this is where we see the first American football scene, because there's a few throughout the film, and we see Forrest score a touchdown as well. But he continues running off the film because he doesn't quite understand the rules, which, to be fair, I don't understand the rules of American football either.
I've tried. It's not for me. But yeah, there's the scene where he first runs onto the field and then he becomes the footballer. But the coach, when he scores the touchline, another line that really just I remember, and I think is great. He may be the stupidest son of a bitch alive, but he sure is fast. A little bit of an accent there. I apologise to our American listeners, and I'll probably have to apologise several times more. But let's continue rolling. We've got a scene later on, which is one of the first, I think maybe the first American historic scene. So it's actual footage where Gump is kind of sliced into it, which I think is really clever how they do this throughout the film. You see Gump in the background while the Alabama Governor George Wallace stood at the door of the University of Alabama, where they're trying to prevent black students from entering after the desegregation of schools. So, monumental piece of American history, which Forrest Gump just happens to be involved in. And then later on, we've got Forrest meeting the US president as part of his college football team. Not for the last time that Forrest meets a president. And it's a funny scene because he doesn't really make much, doesn't make much of a deal about meeting the president. It's more about the free catering and the free drinks. And he has over 10 bottles of Dr. Pepper because they're free. And then when he comes to shake hands with the president, he's bursting for the toilet. And I think the president says, "How does it feel?" And he just goes, "I gotta pee."
It is good. And Andy, I think even though this film came out, what is it? How many years is it now?
29 years ago.
I still think, the historic clips, they still hold up. I was really impressed, It wasn't, some films that you watch, you think, oh, that looks really, like, dated. I thought they were really well done still.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there was any, like, dodgy CGI or green screen moments at all, really, throughout the film. But yeah, these scenes in particular, I think, were really well done.
And I would be fascinated, and I haven't done this, and I always think about, I need to do it, to watch the original clips. Because I know later on when he meets John Lennon, when the TV show that he appears on, John Lennon was with his wife. So they've cut her out and replaced her with Forrest Gump. But I'm always curious to see what the original footage was before, they've put Tom Hanks in it. I was kind of intrigued to see what they look like. Moving on, Forrest joins the army and he meets Bubba.
Again, I'm going to add in some quotes here at this point because there's just so much memorable dialogue. I thought the interaction between the two in the meet was really good, and Bubba, as we'll find out, is all about the shrimp in life. And he asks Forrest, "Have you ever been on a real shrimp boat?" And Forrest replies, this may be the funniest line of the film for me, "No, but I've been on a real big boat."
It's a good line, Andy. During the army bit, there's lots of scenes, isn't there, Andy? Especially at the beginning bit, where it's basically Bubba just talking about shrimps and Forrest is just listening. So we see the bit where Forrest breaks the company record for assembling a dismantled gun. And the army life really seems to suit Forrest as well. And he finds out that Jenny has posed for Playboy. And he goes to the strip club to find her. But he doesn't collar on, does he, that it's a strip club. He's just gone there to listen to her sing. And Forrest and Bubba go off to the Vietnam War, and they meet Lieutenant Dan Taylor for the first time.
Yeah, this is a good portion of the film, this, particularly musically. So the Vietnam scenes has some really, really good songs in the background. Banger after banger after banger, as someone might say. Then we get to a scene where the platoon is attacked, and Forrest runs to safety. But then he runs so fast that he's kind of on his own, so he goes back into the war zone and he's rescuing several wounded troops along the way. He's actually looking for Bubba, isn't he? But other soldiers keep needing his assistance, so he's just one after the other carrying soldiers to safety. However, he finally gets to Bubba, and Bubba dies in Forrest's arms. Side note, during this rescue, Forrest was shot in the bum, or the ass, as our American friends might say. And just a quick note on this section of the film. We've kind of skipped over a little bit, but it's not a long part of the film. It didn't take up as much as I remembered it, but the friendship between Forrest and Bubba, I think, was a really, really integral part of the film. It was a pure friendship, wasn't it? I've made the note they're a pair of kind-hearted simpletons. But I seem to remember this being a longer portion of the film. I thought, because of the gravitas that their two friendship has, but it was actually quite a short part of the film, wasn't it? The two of them together.
Yeah, when I saw your comment there, Andy, I agree with it, because thinking back, I just thought there was more in Vietnam. But I suppose, because Lieutenant Dan features afterwards, I'm thinking, maybe it's the post-war that is more in there, not necessarily the stuff that's actually in Vietnam. And, like you said, Bubba isn't in it that much, actually, really. Obviously, as Andy mentioned, Forrest has got injured during the rescue attempts and is in rehab now. And during rehab, Forrest learns to play ping pong, and he receives the Medal of Honor as well. So Forrest meets the US president, this time it's Johnson. And during the medal ceremony, he shows the president his war-injured bum, or buttocks, I think. Forrest calls it.
In the buttocks, wasn't he? That's where he was shot. He's in DC, of course, because he's meeting the president, and there's a speech going on, like a protest rally type thing, and he's just kind of wandering around and accidentally ends up on stage to give a speech. This is another really funny scene, and again, it's one of those quotes that stuck with me all these years. I'll say the first bit. I might have to cut this out or edit it, but basically the guy asks him, "Are you going to talk about the war?" And Forrest goes, "The war in Vietnam?" And the bloke goes, "The war in Vietnam," which is a really good line, which I will censor. But the thing that really sticks with me is, so in the background there's someone trying to pull the plug on the wires. So what you hear Forrest say is, "Well, there's only one thing I can say about the war in Vietnam. In Vietnam, and that's all I have to say about that."
It is a good bit. That is a good bit, Andy. There's so many good bits in Forrest Gump, and Forrest meets Jenny during a big rally in Washington, and as he's doing that speech, and he later meets members of the Black Panthers as well. So later on, we see Forrest playing ping pong again, and everyone is watching him, and they miss the moon landing / moonwalk. I can't quite remember which one it was that is being broadcast on the TV, and that's when he's just playing with himself, isn't he, with the table? I think the table's folded up, or he might be doing two-handed one. I can't quite recall which bit that is. Do you remember, Andy?
I think it might be when the table's kind of at an L shape, and he's just hitting it back off the other side of the table. It's like acting like a wall, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't play ping pong at all. I just hate that game. So Forrest is really, really good at ping pong, and he goes to China to play, and this leads to the TV appearance that I mentioned a few minutes ago with John Lennon, who is obviously one of the guests as well. And Andy, I can't remember the talk show host, but I did read as part of the research that the talk show host actually helped film that. So it was the only historical clip that they kind of reshot with him, but then kind of de-aged him as well. So I thought that was interesting.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realise that. It's probably technology ahead of its time for 1994. But once Forrest is done with his TV appearance, he leaves the studio, and there's Lieutenant Dan in his wheelchair. He's a drunken mess, safe to say. And there's a scene, I don't know if it's the same time frame or whether it's just soon afterwards, but I get the feeling it's around the same time. So it's New Year's Eve. Dan and Forrest are with two lady friends, shall we say, and Forrest doesn't really want to partake in the action which is going on, if you catch what I'm throwing to you. And one of the ladies makes some remark about him being stupid, and Lieutenant Dan then comes to his defence, and the party's over at that point. Lieutenant Dan's trying to defend Forrest, and as Forrest is talking on the bench, he remarks, "He didn't want to be called crippled, just like I didn't want to be called stupid." And it's quite I probably didn't realise it at the time, but watching it back now with fresh eyes, it's probably quite a poignant line that is in the film.
It is because, and I know I'm jumping ahead here, Andy, but when he finds out about his son, and he's kind of like saying, he doesn't say those words, but he says something like, "Is he smart?" or something like that, doesn't he?
Yeah, he kind of goes, "Is he smart or is he?" And he can't bring himself to say the word, but he's obviously thinking, "I hope he's not stupid." But at this point, I thought that was quite a poignant line, like I say, and particularly where Lieutenant Dan was in his life and Forrest was in his. It was really, really good stuff here by both of them. And we're moving ahead still. Forrest meets the president again, third time. Nixon is this one, and he's talking about his achievements in ping pong. That's the reason for him being there. Nixon makes a comment about what hotel he's staying at, and Forrest tells him, he's like, no, I've got a better hotel, I'll hook you up, sort of thing. It turns out to be Watergate Hotel, and Forrest witnessed the the famous Watergate break-in, and he actually phones security, doesn't he? And say
He does.
there's
Yeah.
people with lights on down there. Or something. It's just something that they've taken and made it really trivial in Forrest's hands. Another great scene.
It is. I love these little tidbits where Forrest is just present, isn't he? So many iconic moments in America's history. Now, Forrest is later discharged from the army, and he goes back home to be with his mum. Now, Forrest ends up buying a shrimp boat with, obviously, he discussed this with Bubba, and he gets the money from the sponsorship, where he said he used a ping pong paddle, and I think he said some words as well. I can't quite remember, but it was going to get $25,000 for doing this little piece of work with the paddle. And shortly afterwards, there is a funny scene where Lieutenant Dan is on the pier and Forrest sees him, and he just jumps off the boat, and it crashes in a nearby pier. And I always thought this was strange, because I remember this happening, Andy, when I'm watching it as a teenager. Because when they're talking, the boat crashes like behind them, but it's the angle is shooting kind of like from the right to left. But the boat would have been going to the right side. So I always thought that was weird.
Yeah, I agree. I think the boat must have turned around somehow. Maybe it was stuck on left hand down or something on the steering wheel. But yeah, it's arguably a continuity error, but I think we can forgive it. I've not wrote this in the notes, but again, I've just thought of another interaction between the two. Because isn't this where Lieutenant Dan says, "I've come to try out my sea legs"? And Forrest goes, "But you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan." Again, it's a funny line, but it comes from such a place of innocence. So Forrest is, he's explaining the story, and he tells there's a guy sitting next to him now, and he says that he owns the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and the bloke's like, "Wait, you own the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company?" And then he walks off saying, "No, I've been sat next to a millionaire," obviously not believing him. And then the old lady who sat next to that guy kind of shuffles up and says something about, "Oh, well, that's a lovely story." And then Forrest shows her a picture of a magazine cover of him and Lieutenant Dan. Because I think at this point maybe she didn't believe him either, and then the look on her face like, "Oh my God, he's telling the truth."
It is. And Andy, I know we mentioned this just before we started recording. So obviously we're based in England. I've never been to America, so I wasn't quite sure whether Bubba Gump Shrimp Company was a real thing, or they've done various bits with the historical bits, and how Gump is involved with them. So the research shows that this is actually a real life company, and it was started after being inspired by the Forrest Gump film. So as of today, there are 34 restaurants across 8 different countries. And another interesting side note is the actor Chris Pratt, famous for playing Star-Lord in the MCU and Owen Grady in the Jurassic World trilogy films, worked as a waiter in the Hawaii restaurant. So Andy, when you go to America next time, you might have to check out Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. They have a lot of restaurants in Asia as well, actually.
It's funny you mention that, because when I was in San Francisco 19 years ago, I don't know if it was a Bubba Gump restaurant or whether it was a gift shop, but it was definitely Bubba Gump, because outside there was a bench with a Forrest Gump looky-likey, I guess you'd call it, sat taking pictures with people. And apologies to listeners if I've told this story before, but it's quite a funny story. My sister was with me, and she wanted a photo taken next to Forrest Gump, and I'm trying to use her camera, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And Forrest Gump leans over to my sister and says, "Your brother is not a smart man."
Yeah, no, you've not told that story before, Andy. So would that be a different time you went to America and saw Jolie?
Same trip. I did, 2004. I had a few days in LA, a few days in San Francisco, a few days in Vegas, and a couple of days at the Grand Canyon. So I did kind of West Coast-ish. Back when I was still a teenager myself, only 19 years old. Anyway, let's get back to present day. We're talking about Forrest Gump, of course. He goes home from the shrimp boat because his mum's sick. She's dying of cancer. And this is not the first, but one of many emotional scenes coming up, where basically she's on her deathbed, she passes away from cancer. Forrest explains that Lieutenant Dan has invested the money into Apple, or a fruit company, as he calls it. So it means he never has to work again. He's got all the money he could ever dream of. And then we get the return of Jenny again. They spend the night together, but she leaves the following morning. Jenny's had a difficult life. She leaves Forrest again, and part of this, when they're kind of having this reunion, they're walking through Greenbow, Alabama, and they come across Jenny's childhood home, and Jenny's visibly upset, and she starts throwing stones. And this was a real tearjerker, this scene, for me, because obviously it brings back memories for her of what her dad did to him. Forrest, again, he's somewhat oblivious to it. But yeah, so she's had a tough life, but what a bitch. She's left him again.
It is sad. I got tearful on two bits, Andy. This wasn't one of them. I might have done, in the countless times I've seen this film. The two bits was later on when he finds out he's a dad, and then the wedding with Jenny were the two bits that still made me well up a little bit. It's interesting because it's like what is happening with Jenny, because she's obviously she was abused as a child, and it's good because throughout the film there's certain bits where, for example, Gump, when he's in Vietnam, he's looking at the stars, isn't he, or the moon, and then it kind of cuts to where Jenny is as well, and it kind of just shows you what she's going through. So throughout the film, it's not flashbacks, but it cuts to Jenny doing various stuff, and she's always in even an abusive relationship, or she's self-destructive, and it kind of makes you wonder whether the reason why she never stayed with Forrest Gump, did she kind of always think that she wasn't good enough for Forrest? Is that why she is like constantly running away, and she's kind of giving him an opportunity to find someone that's genuine like him?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think the only alternative, although it's kind of tied in, is maybe that she's worried she would hurt him by just being around him, because everything she touches turns to crap, sort of thing. One thing I did think about, not only this scene but various throughout, where you've got those kind of, I guess it's in parallel, isn't it? It's Jenny's life in parallel with Forrest as he's telling his story. Does he know what Jenny's going through? Because, is he telling Jenny's story as well? That's why we're seeing the scene. Or is it just oh, by the way, this is what's happening with Jenny in the background, and he doesn't actually know, and that's why he's so oblivious to things, because he doesn't understand the context. Either way kind of works, but I wonder if he's oblivious rather than he's telling the story.
I think he's oblivious, just because the bit we haven't mentioned this, but the bit where they're at university and she's kissing some bloke in a car, he's very protective. So I think if he was, because obviously she never replied to any of his letters, so I think if she ever told him what was happening, I think he would have just gone straight there to try to help her.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So for me, the whole film, Andy, so Jenny's left him, she gave him some trainers, and this is my favourite bit in the whole film. So Forrest goes for a run, and I just love this bit because it's just going, over the time period. You see him running, his beard's getting longer, and at this particular point it says he's been running for more than 2 years, and it's the 4th time he's crossed America.
So there's a couple of funny bits during these running scenes. There's a guy who's running next to him, and he sees Forrest step in some dog mess. So he says to him, "Oh my God, you just stood in that dog shit." He goes, "It happens," and that leads to the "shit happens" car bumper stickers, which are world famous. And then there's a bit where there's a guy with a yellow t-shirt running alongside Forrest, and then gets a huge splash of mud in the face from a passing car. So he passes him the yellow t-shirt, wipes his face, hands it back to him, and says, "Have a nice day." And you see the what is now iconic yellow smiley face image that goes with the "Have a nice day." So again, just a couple of not American history points, but they're kind of pop culture references that he is supposedly responsible for. And then he decides, I'm going to stop running after 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. So that's quite the shift he's put in there. I did have a couple of follow-up questions though on the running piece. So he does change his clothes quite a few times throughout the run, and I think he does say he just stops to eat and sleep. But where are his other clothes? And where's his wallet? Because he's got to keep buying these clothes and staying in hotels or motels whenever to sleep. I know he can afford it. It's not a matter of having enough money. It's just, where is that money? Is it on his person? And, how does he transport it about?
No, the valid comments, Andy. I think he probably just literally just has the clothes on, on him. That's it. I think he when he needs to wrap up or wear his summer gear, I think it's literally he just goes and buys them and then probably either donates the ones to charity or just gets rid of them. I think maybe though, in terms of the wallet, Andy, he's ahead of his time and he's got something like Google Pay or Apple Pay or something, and he just uses his mobile phone to pay for everything, or maybe it's cryptocurrency or something.
Yeah, in the late 70s, early 80s, as this would have been sat, it would have been ahead of his time. That's true. Or maybe, as he's crossing America so many times, one of the stops along the way is just back to his own house, just to pick up some more cash, and then carries on running.
Maybe he doesn't know about ATM machines, so that's why he keeps going back. Like you said, he keeps going home to his little money pot or something. But as Andy mentioned, he's finished now, and Forrest goes to see Jenny, and we find out he's a dad to little Forrest Jr. And Jenny is sick, and she mentions that she has a virus, which I believe is implied to be HIV. But doing the research of this episode, and it's an interesting side note that in the novel she actually has hepatitis C, and Forrest and Jenny get married, and because she proposes to him, so they get married. I thought that was nice because obviously she says no, doesn't she, earlier on in the film about marriage.
She does, yeah. I'm just going to jump in at this point. This has just come to my mind because I completely agree with you that it's implied to be HIV, but the timing, I'm not sure if it lines up.
I know, I've thought about this, yeah.
Because as we'll find out soon, she dies, and the headstone says 1982 is the time she dies. Was HIV a thing in 82, or was it a little bit later than that?
I'm not too sure. I know it was the 80s, and she does say, doesn't she, that the doctors don't know. Because
so maybe it's one of the first cases of HIV, do you think, and that's why they don't know?
Yeah, but my query was, it was to do with a timeline. So, did she have HIV when she slept with Forrest, or does she get it afterwards? But then you would say, if she got it afterwards, I took it that after she met Forrest for the last time, before she got married, before she disappeared, I thought he was more on the straight and narrow now. So it would be implied that it was afterwards. And also, I Googled this, Andy, because I wasn't too sure about little Forrest Jr. So there's only, based on very quick Google search, there's only a 5% chance of hepatitis C being passed on to your child.
Interesting, yeah. We're divulging into some medical section of the... I've just had a quick Google, and it says, so the first thing is from Screen Rant, saying she dies of hepatitis C in the book, while she dies of AIDS in the movies, according to Screen Rant. Notably, hepatitis C was discovered in 1989, which is why the doctors could do little for her, because it hadn't been discovered yet. So maybe it all plays into the unknown virus piece. But yeah, apologies for the medical tangent there.
And I don't think there's a cure for hepatitis C, from memory. Let us know if there is anyone out there. And Lieutenant Dan arrives for the wedding, and we see that he has metal legs. So obviously, he's had sea legs, and now he's got metal legs. And he brings his fiancée to the wedding as well. And Lieutenant Dan is in a much better place now, and that's down to Forrest. If if he stayed as the drunken mess that Andy mentioned earlier, he would have probably drunk himself to an early grave. But going to see Forrest and working on, the shrimping boats has definitely saved his life.
Absolutely, yeah. And we get to the end of the film now. There's a few emotional scenes. Obviously, there was the one with Forrest meeting Forrest earlier, which was a bit of a tearjerker. Another tearjerker is when Jenny dies and he's buried under the tree, and Forrest is at the graveside, and just a heart-wrenching scene where he's he tells her that he's had her childhood home knocked down and he's doing his best by little Forrest. And then the film ends with them waiting for the school bus, and little Forrest Jr. catches the school bus just as much in the same way that Forrest did way back at the start of the film. And the white feather that we had at the start floats into the air to end the film. And we cut to credits.
The Rain Room.
So that was our notes on Forrest Gump. Fantastic film, I'm sure you will agree. But before we get into any sort of ratings, what did our wives think of this? Jay, did your wife watch this with you?
So, Andy, this is the first time in the episodes so far that we've done. I can't remember how many we've done throughout season 1. And obviously this is episode 2 of season 2. It's the first time she's not watched it, Andy, because she was too busy planning her girls' weekend away. And she came back today and she's nursing a hangover. So I said to her, I'm recording the episode of Andy soon. Do you have any comments? And she said, I've seen Forrest Gump over 10 times. And I said, okay, have you really? She said, yeah, I've seen it loads. I said, do you want to give me any kind of comments? And she says, I like Bubba and Lieutenant Dan, but I dislike Jenny. And I was like, me and Andy are going to talk about Jenny. But so that was her comment. So what about you, Andy?
And before I go with my wife's comments, which there aren't any, but was that an impression of your wife's voice there that you just did? was that your acting chops on display?
That was basically for the last week, Andy, me trying to suggest watching Forrest Gump to the missus, and she was like, throughout the week, I've seen it so many times. And I was like, okay, does that mean you want me to like watch it on my own? If you want to watch, because it's on for quite a long time, isn't it? She said, if you want to start watching it, I might come in like part way through or something. So I held off basically until it was getting later and later, think we might watch it together. But then obviously she went away for the weekend, so I watched it on my Todd. And I quite enjoyed it because I could just freely make my notes and I didn't have to keep making comments or try to keep her awake or anything like that. So, yes.
Watched it with freedom in mind. Sadly, my wife didn't watch it with me this time. Scheduling conflicts. I've had a bit of a busy time, so we couldn't watch it together. She is going to take part in some Tom Hanks films watching, I assure you. Just finding the time. But I do know that this is a film that she absolutely loves. So it will definitely get a thumbs up from her. But enough about our wives. Let's talk about what we think of the film, shall we? Shall we get into some ratings? Jay, what did you think of this out of 10?
And I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I gave it a season high 9 out of 10. Very close to 10 out of 10, but it was a 9 out of 10. What about you, Andy?
I thought it would be before I started watching, and it still is. It's a slam dunk 10 out of 10. One of my absolute favourite films of all time.
So that's your second 10 out of 10 so far on the Rating Room podcast, isn't it? First this season.
First of the season. Will we get more? I guess keep tuning in to find out.
Indeed. So what we've done, we did this in big and we've introduced this in season 2. We are doing the IMDb and the Rotten Tomatoes ratings as well. So I'm going to go first. So on IMDb, as of this recording, Forrest Gump has an 8.8 out of 10. So very strong scoring there.
Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes has a couple of slightly differing viewpoints. So on the tomatometer, it's 71%, but it has a 95% audience score. I think we'd agree audience score is probably more reliable here based on our ratings.
Indeed. So in this segment, we're going to tend to be the casting couch. And obviously we mentioned earlier on about John Travolta and Forrest Gump in, Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump. So this is where we are recasting the Tom Hanks role with another famous Tom. So during season 2, we have the chance to cast either
Tom Holland, Tom Hiddleston, Tom Cruise, or Tom Hardy. So who are we picking this week and why? Jay, your pick first.
So I'm going to mix it up, Andy. I'm going for Tom Hardy. So Hardy has played the role of Mad Max in Mad Max Fury Road, which is a brilliant film. And in the Mad Max films, the ones with Mel Gibson as well, Max is a man of few words. So I think Hardy would need to get back to kind of the physique that he had in Layer Cake and Star Trek Nemesis as well. So he needs to debulk. And I also think though, Tom Hiddleston would play Forrest Gump too. Well, but I'd like to see Hardy. He's very versatile, Hardy is, and he's played so many different roles. So I'd like to see Hardy as Gump. What about you, Andy? Which Tom have you picked this week?
So I've gone for Tom Cruise. 2 reasons. Partly, I think he's because he's pretty good range as an actor. I think he would have pulled this off quite well. I'm not sure about southern accent though. I'm not sure how he would sound with that. So maybe it would be a Tom Cruise sounding Forrest Gump character. But also, I kind of want to see him chased down the road by bullies throwing stones at him. Yes,
and this might have won Tom Hanks that elusive Academy Award that he wants for Best Actor.
Tom Cruise, you mean?
Tom Cruise, yes, sorry. Tom Cruise, yes.
Tom Hanks is doing fine. Academy Award stage.
Tom Cruise is sat there envious. If only we were in the casting couch, Andy, he could have done it. So this next segment is another new one, and we obviously covered this last week. So it's the 6 degrees of James Bond. So in this segment, we explore the concept that we are all connected to one another by only 6 degrees of separation. And we mentioned this a few times in season 1.
We did, yeah. Season 1, we rewatched and discussed all the official James Bond films. So for season 2, we're going to explore how Tom Hanks is linked to the different actors of the James Bond films.
So this week, we're going to explore how Jules Lazenby is linked to Tom Hanks. So Lazenby obviously played James Bond once in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, make sure you go back to episode 6 of season 1 to hear what we thought of Lazenby's performance in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And our 4th bonus episode, we talk about Lazenby's career before and after portraying Bond in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and Andy, last week you mentioned about trying to increase the number of degrees between Tom Hanks and the James Bond actors. So last week, from memory, we did Sean Connery and Tom Hanks in 2. So therefore, Andy, this week I've tried to restrict the criteria to make it harder to find the link. So I'm going to kick us off. So the first link is obviously Jules Lazenby, and he was in The Operation with Tony Counter.
Tony Counter was in The Vanishing Army with Timothy Spall.
Now, Timothy Spall was in 9 Kisses with Julianne Moore.
Julianne Moore was in Killers Kill, Dead Men Die with Bruce Willis.
And Bruce Willis was in the Saturday Night Live 15th anniversary special with Tom Hanks.
So we've succeeded again. This week's 6 degrees of James Bond is completed in 5 degrees. Now let's get on to the main event of our Rating Room podcast, and that is the rank bank. We're going to be talking various bits of information in the rank bank here. Jay, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the runtime. So we've had 2 films so far. Big was 1 hour 44 minutes, and Forrest Gump comes in at 2 hours 22 minutes. So Forrest Gump is number 1 in the runtime chart so far.
Okay, let's move on to box office. As mentioned earlier, the budget was $55 million. The worldwide box office was $679.8 million. And the adjusted box office was a whopping $1.39 billion. So that easily puts it in number 1 spot in our rankings.
So this next one is called the Hanks character. So this is where we rank the different characters that Hanks plays. So we've obviously had Josh Baskin last week from Big, and I've put Forrest Gump in at number 1. There's no debate in this, Andy. I'm pretty comfortable here. to say Tom Hanks' Forrest Gump is better than Josh in Big. So nice 1-2 for me there. What about you, Andy?
I have to agree with you. I thought Hanks did a great job as Josh Baskin in Big, but Forrest Gump is next level acting. Superb performance. So he goes in at number 1 for me as well. Now, supporting actors, we've picked the main supporting actor to put in our rankings, which for Forrest Gump would be the character Jenny, played by Robin Wright. Now, last week we had Elizabeth Perkins playing the part of Susan from Big, and I've got Jenny in at number 1 above Susan. I think a much more well-rounded character, very, very well portrayed. A lot more substance to the role, I thought. And I thought Robin Wright did a tremendous job as Jenny. What about you, Jay? Do you agree or disagree?
I completely agree. This one for me, Andy, was really straightforward. Robin Wright really did well getting the complexity of Jenny's character. I mean, Elizabeth Perkins was good as Susan, but it's... I don't know how you felt, but you know where you're comparing a more serious role with a more comedic, more light-hearted role could be a bit difficult, but Forrest Gump is a better film, and Robin Wright's Jenny is a better character, better actor as well. Moving on, we've obviously gave our film rankings earlier on, so let's just recap. I gave Forrest Gump 9 out of 10 and Big 8 out of 10, so Forrest Gump is the new number 1. How about you, Andy?
Well, with my 10 out of 10, straight in top of the pile. It's going to be tough to move. And just as a recap, I gave Big 7 out of 10 last week. So I think that brings us to the end of another episode of The Rating Room. Thanks for listening, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed it.
So we love hearing from our listeners, and we encourage you to email us with any feedback, questions or suggestions you may have. So your input helps us to create better content and makes this show more engaging for everyone.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us at theratingroom@gmail.com. We'll do our best to respond to every email that we receive, of course.
And you can also contact us via our website, and you can find all the show notes that we do for all our episodes on our website, which is www.theratingroom.com, and make sure also to subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Rating Room.
You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok and Instagram by following us on @TheRatingRoom. Send us a message, leave us a comment. Be sure to follow us, stay up to date with all the latest episodes and news. Which brings us to the end, and next week we've got episode 3 of season 2. Now, where do we go from here, Jay? We were in childhood, going to adulthood last week. This week we were going through American history. So where do we go next? You know, we could go to a faraway island somewhere. We could go to a town in Pennsylvania. But I think we should go to infinity and beyond. As next week we're going to be discussing Toy Story. Thanks for listening, everybody.